most of us know this lady in some capacity. But as I told you all, we're wearing name tags today so that she can put faces and names together. Not that her memory is failing.
Like everybody
Selective. Like it is
Yeah.
selective. So anyway, what we're going to hear about today is the gospel of the CSJs. Have you ever heard of the gospel? It's the good news. And here she is, our gospel giver.
That's pretty heavy. My name is Sister Cate Filla, and I'm so delighted to have been invited to be with you today. I told Jean on the drive over here, I didn't really know how I was going to start. I've got a lot of material, but what's a good starting point? I'm going to start with you, because when you came in,
I have to interrupt her for one thing that you all don't know. You're all being recorded, so please smile. And the reason for this, and here is our communications specialist, Peg, who is doing it. And this is for, like, Mary Kay, who cannot be here today. And the interesting thing is, a couple of you who have spouses, instead of the poor guys coming among all of us, they were interested in hearing this. And so this is going to be passed around, and it'll be available for anyone else. I just wanted to be sure nobody makes faces or sits there.
And I'm not sure of the volume, so maybe speak a little louder.
all right,
Thank you.
when you came in, you all greeted one another, you're all connected, and it's wonderful. You have individual lives, but there's something coming together that is a bond that you share. And my starting point is going to be really kind of the ending point of our story. And then I will backtrack. There is a committee that you probably have never heard of called the Global Coordinating Committee. Representatives that come to this committee represent the four federations: the Federation of the United States, Canada, France, and Italy. And in addition to that, another seat on the committee goes to the Institute, which are the sisters in France that trace their beginnings to Le Puy, the Annecy community in France, because they have many foreign missions, especially in India, the Chambéry congregation, because they have very many missions. So those Chambéry, Annecy, and the Institute are considered international congregations. When these women gather to meet, they say they really represent Sisters of St. Joseph all over the world. Just as we have a connection here, Sisters of St. Joseph are all connected throughout the world.
Maureen, you need to move that.
I got it.
She can do it. She's slithering, that's all right.
Don't sit.
Yeah, I'm trying to watch that too.
So we are all connected. When we read the newspaper, it's easy to just say what's in the newspaper article of an event someplace in the world. But what I'm asking you to do is to be aware that there are Sisters of St. Joseph there. Last summer, I was really privileged to be in Le Puy at the time that the Chambéry congregation had its newer members come for a 2-week gathering. They represented 4 language groups: Portuguese, English, French, and Spanish. They came from Bolivia, Peru, India, Brazil, France, and Italy. That is just that one congregation, but they are spread out all over the world, just as all these members, the women representing their congregations or federations on the Global Coordinating Committee. They sponsor sisters to come from Africa or India, poor congregations who can't afford the opportunity to connect with other sisters of St. Joseph, to come to Le Puy for perhaps a retreat, or every year they have the Global Heart retreat or seminar, where they learn about our foundations, what we have in common as Sisters of St. Joseph. The Indian sisters told me the story, and when I told Jean, this really prompted her to invite me to come. And why I'm asking you to keep awareness of our global presence. When we read of the persecution of the church, remember, there are Sisters of St. Joseph that are often targeted. Two of the Indian sisters told me that they were barricaded in their convent for 8 days, surrounded by Hindu extremists, and they stayed there until the army could come to break up those people, that force that were really holding the sisters captive. Another sister told me the story of being tracked. She was being followed, and she knew it was a very threatening situation for her. The Indian sisters are not really trained, though, to talk about their trials. It was kind of like in moments of weakness that I got those stories. When the challenge for women who are entering the sisters in India, I heard from one of the sisters who's in leadership position. She said, our challenge is to prepare these young women for martyrdom. We don't think about that, do we? I'm going to back up now to talk. This is the weakest part of my talk. It's the early foundation, because I told someone this past week, I am not a historian, meaning I don't do footnotes. And someone said, yes, but you're a historian. That's what I like to do, is to tell stories. So in talking with Jean, I thought my topic was the foundation. So that's what I prepared, but I am open to questions. I'm going to talk about the 16th century and what it was like. The 16th century was a time of war, disease, hardship, famine, flooding. Anything that could possibly go wrong was going wrong. In the year 1516, Martin Luther wrote to his bishop and said, I've got some problems with the church. Instead of engaging in a conversation, of course, the church goes into a reactionary mode called the Council of Trent. Now, for our purposes, one of the things that happened is that strictures are put on the cloister for religious women. And by 1566, this is after the Council of Trent, Pius V said, a woman who breaks cloister, meaning who leaves the cloister, is excommunicated. We don't want these women running around.
Good.
We could. I talked about the disease and the famine and the hardships that people were facing in a time of the 16th century. A time of war. Men are really in the army, have been drafted. It's high taxes. There's nothing left. The women are left at home. But in Le Puy, the city that I'm going to talk about a little bit more, in July 1629, the daily death toll from bubonic plague was between 100 and 160 people a day. So what do you think about your life when all you can see around you is death and destruction? In addition to all of that, the infant mortality rate for your children, you could expect 1 out of every 4 children to die before the age of 5. So people who have pulpit a room, the moralist of the century said to women, you need to stay home and take care of your family. For one thing, the men weren't there. They were either looking for jobs in cities or in the army, but that's what you should do. I read this description of someone who would be alive at that time. They were described as contentious, morose, disorderly, melancholy, and miserable. It would be very easy to assume that all of this is a punishment from God. It's a result of sin. You caused your own problems. Marcia Allen might say that Jean-Pierre Médaille, who is important in our story, the Jesuit priest I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, might have voiced it in this way. It is not a question of trying to get to God nor to please God. Rather, we are already caught up in love and are partners with God in recreating the abundance of love around us. God is present, waiting to be found. Where God is active, energy is focused in desire for loving union. So what happens during this time, the 1600s? Imagine a pot that you have on the stove and you want to bring it to a boil. Now, do you know that it's ready when there's one big pop in the middle of the pot? No. You can see bubbles starting all over the place. And this is exactly the situation in France when there are these little bubbles popping up. And much of it may have been inspired by the preaching of, or the work of Vincent de Paul in Paris early on in the century. His take was that, you know, let's help the poor. So there are confraternities, different small groups that are doing works of mercy in their neighborhoods, here, there, and often without a whole lot of notoriety. Often these were secret societies. And in Le Puy, France, the Beats numbered about 70 women at this time. This is prior to the establishment of the 1650 foundation of the Sisters of St. Joseph. So they predate the sisters. There were 70 women, and their work was described as teaching catechism to girls and women. They taught these young women how to say prayers, and they taught them how to use their work, to see their work as a sanctifying medium for them, that it could be raised to God. I have this underlined, and I'm just going to read it, if that's all right with you. I hate reading, but I'm going to read it. It has been suggested that the Jesuits working at the time of the bubbling up of all these different groups, that they gathered these various groups together in kind of a network.
I'm sorry. I forgot. And I can't even find it.
It's a lovely melody.
Yeah, I'll make sure my.
And I see other people reaching for their purses. It's a good thing. We're all connected, aren't we?
Yes, it's sad to say.
So the Jesuits would work with these smaller groups that are trying to do work in their neighborhoods. They met the women who were being called to a new way of life within the church. Some of you have heard the name Connie DeBias, and recently there's been a publication that she has helped, I guess, inspire on the early documents of the community. I'm not real strong on that, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. And she would say that there are two possible sources of the Sisters of St. Joseph in the early foundation. One is that Madai comes to Le Puy, meets with the bishop, gathers these women together and establishes them and works in the orphanage for girls. That's one, and that's a story, that's like the Reader's Digest version. She said another possible, she said we can't really verify that historically, that is the one true story. I heard a talk by a sister who was tracing her family and the Sisters of St. Joseph in a parallel way. And she said she can trace her family and the Sisters of St. Joseph to Bordeaux, France in 1628. Now this is much earlier. Now, are these sisters in Bordeaux the predecessors of the sisters in Le Puy? We don't know. Because these groups could have been founded together locally, could have called themselves sisters, or had the bishop recognize them. They may have been called Sisters of St. Joseph, but really, do we connect them at all? We can't do that either. It's just that there was a group early on that were calling themselves Sisters of St. Joseph. And I'm not going to talk much about them because I don't know much. Just to say that there's a couple ways to look at our foundation, but think about that pot bubbling up, you know? Thérèse Vacher is a French historian. She's a sister of St. Joseph, and she's written a number of books, and her latest is Nuns Without Cloister. It's the story of the Sisters of St. Joseph in France. I did spend time with this book, but I wrote copious notes because it's a very, it's like a book you have to plow through almost because it gets bogged down in a lot of detail. But in her listing of the early foundations, she does not list Le Puy first. She lists Dunière as the first foundation that we can trace ourselves to with Madai's influence. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Jean-Pierre Madai, who was born in southern France in a city called Carcassonne. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with that, but he was born in 1610. That's the year that St. Francis de Sales, by the way, whose feast day is today, founded the Sisters of the Visitation in Annecy, France. Little, confluence there. He was ordained in 1637, and one of the groups that was in Le Puy doing some study of our foundations had pictures on the wall of things that they wanted the participants to look at. And one was a drawing of Jean-Pierre Madai walking. He had his knapsack on his back, he had his cane, his walking staff with his sombrero or his hat, but he was walking. And if you know anything about the geography of France, this is Le Puy, it's hilly. Here is Saint-Flour, where Madai was one of the places that he was missioned. Madai was never missioned or stayed in Le Puy, as his residence. But he was missioned in several places in France, and Saint-Flour was one of them. And some sources would say it is here that he conceived the idea of the little design. He's meeting with women there already prior to the foundation in Le Puy. But it's hilly, he's walking. And even today, there's really no direct route. You have to go like this to get there. So, and I'm told that even in bad weather, these roads close because it's, well, just stay home, you know, you don't need to go anyplace. So, one of the things I read in Vache's book is that Madai organized the early sisters so that the smaller houses would always relate to a larger house. The smaller places would have their more relaxed rules than the city house, like the city house in Lepuy. And it was based on the Jesuit model. And I'm saying that because Lepuy does have a Jesuit school founded in the 1600s. So as a missionary almost, if it's the same model, they would have gathered here the Jesuits in the surrounding areas for like community meetings perhaps. It's in 1644, we know, that Madai and Henri de Maupas, the bishop, have a meeting. Now, de Maupas's gravestone has Father of the Poor. And I have to say, I think de Maupas is undercredited. Well, let's go back to Francis de Sales. What happens to him? 1610, he and Jane Frances de Chantal begin this community of prayer and service for these women. They put them outside the city walls because it's easier. You know, it's kind of like prying, what are these women doing, for Pete's sake? So they're outside the city walls, but by 1617, the Bishop of Geneva says to Francis, bring those women inside the city walls and cloister them. The implication, we don't want these women on the streets. It's, you know, what are you talking about? So de Maupas admires Francis de Sales. He has written a biography of Francis. He also knows Vincent de Paul. He has met Vincent de Paul through a relative of, I think, both of them. And so he admires the work of Vincent de Paul, who has established the Daughters of Charity around 1633. Now, it's this whole thing about cloister, because Vincent de Paul, if I can find it, except I don't need to because I know what the quote is, he says to his women, who he will not let be identified as sisters, but daughters, so they're not, you know, they're just pious women on the streets. He says to them, your cloister will be the city streets and the walls of the orphanage.
Was that in Paris? Or
He is Vincent de Paul is working in Paris. That's where that foundation begins, I believe.
Yeah.
Been there.
So de Maupas knows Francis de Sales, who tries to get a non-cloistered community going. He knows Vincent de Paul, who won't let the women who are coming. They say, you know, we want to do something. So he won't let them be cloistered, but he won't let them be called sisters because then cloister will be imposed on them. He won't let them take final vows, so they take yearly vows. And de Maupas is the right person at the right place at the right time with the right, you know, it's all kind of like in sync. And so when Madai comes and says, they kind of have a plan, but the women are there, and it just seems to work. We know this part of our story, I think. Now, I gave a talk on the early foundations, and I didn't really talk about the early women, because I think you have that in your documents. But I wrote them down if anybody wants to hear their names repeated in this holy assembly. One was 39, one was a widow, one was 26, 46, two women were 15 years old. what was their work? They stayed for 3 months in preparation with a Madame de Joux, and they had work for them. The Maupas, well, let me talk about Le Puy if I can for a minute. Le Puy is a very ancient city. It is on the route of St. James of Compostela, which even today pilgrims travel. But that is even from the Middle Ages. Pilgrims are on this road that goes through Le Puy. There's a cathedral there. It's a place of welcome for pilgrims, but anytime you have pilgrims on a road and they're traveling in difficult times, you have disease, you have people on the streets, so there are orphans there as well. But even today, you know, you see people with their big backpacks and their big hiking boots, and they're on the way. And some of them start in Le Puy. So the bishop has their work, this orphanage for girls, and after their time of preparation, this is where they begin their ministry. After I gave this talk in St. Louis, not this one, but about the early foundation, someone said, well, talk about dividing the city. And I didn't talk about it when I gave that because I really didn't know where that came from. Although most of us have heard that phrase, they divided the city. So I went to the archives and I said to the archivist, where does that come from? She says, well, I think it's in the first Constitution. It's a primitive Constitution. And what I found in reading that was that the directive was assess the needs of the neighborhood. That's the phrasing that's in the Constitution. Divide the city, yeah. What's needed out there? Madai, though, in his, according to, I think, Vache's book, he would say, whenever a work is not being done, do that work. If the work is already being done, you do not need to duplicate it. So that's how Madai would approach, you know, what ministries, what work. So initially the women are in this orphanage, but I wanted to go back. Are they the first religious group to arrive in Le Puy? In 1588. By 1588, these are the religious congregations that are already established in Le Puy because it's an old city with a cathedral. The Jesuits are there, the Franciscans are there, Dominicans are there, the Poor Clares are there, the Carmelites are there. Now, the bishop sets up this orphanage, right? But it's the city authorities that have responsibility to say about these religious congregations. It's their ultimate responsibility. Now, it's like we have to do an attitude thinking about this because these authorities are getting nervous that we've got another religious group here that we're going to be responsible for. So they get, you know, fired up. They go over to this orphanage because they're getting ready to say, no, we don't want your kind here, kind of. But they go over there and their fears are really kind of dissipated because when they go in, they can see that everything is in order. The sisters are, you know, maintaining themselves. So in other words, it's kind of these women are caught between the bishop and the city, but everything worked out, so we got to stay. I'm going to read these because I really have never seen these in print. Maybe you are better students than I am. I'm selective about what I read, but these are the qualities that are listed for Sisters of St. Joseph in the early documents, external and internal. The external qualities that were looked for: good family background, no scandal connected with her behavior, good health, at least no contagious disease or serious handicap, good common sense, good intellect, openness to God, and desire for union with God. And if advanced in age, they must be very virtuous. Okay, what were the interior qualities that were needed? Interior peace, moderation in everything, being pure in heart and body, charity among themselves and with every kind of neighbor, an attraction to holiness, simplicity balanced with prudence, abandonment to the providence of God, profound humility, great love of God expressed in deeds, zeal for the greater glory of God and the salvation and perfection of the neighbor. When I read the list of the interior qualities, I thought, Kate, this would be enough to meditate on. This is enough right there. There are exterior sources, like public sources that talk, like city documents or so forth, that are talked about the sisters. That is quoted in Therese Vachet's book. From Auvergnat, they edify the whole city by their own personal life as well as by inspiring other women. From Crapon, they have great mutual love and acceptance. They share titles, dress, goods, debts. And another source, a public source, would say, the sisters have a great influence on public opinion.
Oh.
There you go. Now, why St. Joseph? De Maupas had a great devotion to St. Joseph. And he quoted Teresa of Avila, who said, I do not see how one can think of the Queen of Angels and all that she suffered in company with the infant Jesus without thanking St. Joseph for having so tirelessly assisted them both. Those who do not find a master to teach them to pray have but to accept this saint for a guide, and they will not go astray. So what we have in the primitive constitutions and in the reglement, this quote, it will bear the name of Saint Joseph, since it will especially live and imitate this great saint in his hidden life, and will be under his protection and safeguard. Have you heard of the Second Vatican Council?